The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. I'm Eddie Webb.
I don't even know how to respond.
And today we're going to talk about the Wheel of Time. Hello and welcome back to Genres. We talk about a show I didn't really know anything about until I started watching it.
So, actually, this episode is less about the Wheel of Time. It's more about us discussing the career of Rosamund Pike, how she went from Bond girl to savior of our crew from the alien invasion in her car to fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's always great to see her on a show. That's it. That's all we're going to talk about. We're done. No,
Yeah. So, thanks for jumping in. Hope you enjoyed the opening intro, and we'll catch you later.
I did have an advantage in the sense that one of my member of my family is actually a huge Wheel of Time fan. They've read the book since they were a kid, and so I was like, "Oh, so you've watched the show?" And they're like, "No, I stopped watching after episode 1." So that gave me a good idea of what I was going to expect watching this. Um, and there's some interesting. I did do a little bit of research. There's some interesting stuff behind it because I vaguely recalled the Wheel of Time had come out before, and I was like, "Is this related to that?" Um, so it turns out that the rights to the Wheel of Time were actually purchased in 2000, and it was been in development hell pretty much since. The rights were about to expire in 2015, so they did actually put out a pilot on Cinemax. I want to say. Um,
Huh.
and this is a common tactic where they make something, they put out like 3 in the morning, show it once, but it legally proves that they are still interested in making the property and that they've made an effort towards making it.
Or you mean, for instance, if I owned a comic book IP for some 8-legged arachnid man, and I didn't want to put that arachnid man into my movies, I could then just make a whole bunch of spin-off movies about whoever their antagonists are, villains, and I make them into anti-heroes. Perhaps one of them is from some country that could be remotely related to Russia that likes to hunt animals but actually befriends animals and gets superpowers that are capable of doing what Arachnid Man could do. And I release it as a big movie and it flops.
Right,
Like
exactly.
that kind of IP right holding move?
Because or the notorious Fantastic Four movie that people deride as being awful, and it was because the point of it was not to make money. The point of it was for that Sony could keep the rights to Fantastic Four.
Or if I want to get, since we're in a fantasy run, I'll get even snarkier. For instance, I own the rights to some of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings stuff, and I'm in the 60s and I want to hold on to them. So I release like a 13,
Hmm.
15-minute cartoon that I call a movie so I can hold on to those. This is before the 77 Hobbit comes out.
Yep. Yeah. Um, so it's not these things are not supposed to be good. They're supposed to be just for legal purposes. And yet, Robert Jordan, who wrote the Wheel of Time books, had passed by this point in time. His widow went online, said it was awful, and they sued her over it.
Oh.
They sued her for publicly deriding the 2015 pilot. It got settled out of court, but that sets a certain tone for how this is going to go forward, I think.
Okay, I know nothing about this world, these books. I think I own the Wheel of Time because I'm a big purchaser of books I intend to read that I never read that's on my shelf.
Right.
What do you know anything about Robert Jordan? I don't even know any controversy. I did no research on this at all because I saw this show and I was like, I'm not going to waste my time.
Right. So, okay. As I understand it, and it does tie a little bit into the actual show itself. Um, Wheel of Time was originally intended to, as I understand, it was intended to be one book, and Robert Jordan did it, and it did really well. So he then wrote a a trilogy to go. Or he turned that book into a trilogy, and we all know like one book that gets turned into a trilogy, how that kind of shift can happen between books 1 and 2. Star Wars went through the same thing, like, even though Empire Strikes Back is great, it's a very different movie because it's setting up a new status quo because it had to kind of take one movie and expand it now into 3 retroactively. So I understand that was turned into a trilogy. Those did even better. And so he decided to write a second trilogy. And he figured that was each time this will probably be it, and then I'll move on to something else. The second trilogy also did extremely well. And so he then committed to writing 6 more books. The idea of the series would definitively end at 12 books. He died before the last couple of books could be written, but he had extremely comprehensive notes. And so Brandon Sanderson came in because he apparently was very good friends with Robert Jordan, came in to finish the books on his behalf. And as a contrast, Robert Jordan wrote on a pretty slow scale. Like I think the
Are we
first books were
talking
like in the
Martin Slow?
no, nobody's Martin Slow. I'm faster than Martin. I'm not written any novels. No, but like several years between books. And anybody who knows Brandon Sanderson, he writes books in his sleep, as far as I can tell. So he very quickly managed to finish off the decalogy. I don't know what the technical term for a 12-book series is. Decalogy, maybe? I don't know. Duodecalogy? He finished off a series. And because that was what Jordan committed to, Sanderson said, I don't plan to do any more after that. If his estate wants to do more, it's obviously up to them, but this is what we're committed to. As I understand it, so the first book is apparently pretty well paced. The first trilogy, slightly slower paced. The second trilogy, a little more slower paced too. Apparently, almost nothing happens in like the back 4 books until Sanderson comes along and says, "Okay, but what if we actually had things happen?" And so the last 2 books apparently are pretty pacey as a result. So like apparently, again, my friends who has very strong opinions about the Wheel of Time has told me that apparently book 10, the entire 800-page book, is the course of one day. I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but I kind of believe it.
So I'm now curious why your family member only watched 1 episode then stopped if they loved the book series so much.
Because this is extremely different from the source material. Um, and I asked how, and I got a 15-minute explanation, of which I understood a bit of, because there's a lot of names being thrown around and who did what, whatnot. And I didn't want to stop because they were clearly having fun being angry, which is a feeling I certainly empathize with. Um, uh, but there's one key scene I'll let you point out that they remarked that was interesting to me. So I'll point it out when we get to it in the part. But as a general overall archetype, the protagonists are supposed to be kids, teenagers, and they very clearly are not in this. They are full ass adults, and not just in a adults playing kids way. The stories they're in very clearly position them as adults, and that is not what they are in the books.
Hmm. So are you saying the books are similar than, well, as much as you know of this, because neither of us are familiar with this, how Martin's protagonists in his books are generally what, 8 to 14? Are these also supposed to be kids around that age range?
So, and that this is where I don't know, because we talked about this in Game of Thrones, right? Like, the ages are all shifted up a bit, but they were shifted up because the tone that HBO is going for, they couldn't do those same things to teenagers and get it by broadcast standards, right?
Yeah.
So, we talked about, but we also talked about, like, for example, Arya Stark, Arya Stark. Um, she's still coded as kid, even though she's moved from like roughly 10 to about 15 ish, right? And because her arc is her growing up to adult, that is part of her arc over the course of the Game of Thrones series. So she has to be somewhat kid coded. Same with Bronn. I mean, he's extremely young, even though he's disabled. And that's part of his character, but he's not like 10. So I don't know if the aging up was meant to be similar thing of these characters go through horrible things, and so therefore, from broadcasting perspectives, they need to be, let's call it 1920-ish range to make this more palatable to an audience. I don't know. Um, but clearly it was enough that, and again, there's one key scene that caused my friend to, or my family member to shut the TV off. I'll get to that. Um, so there are other apparently big changes. Um, but also the pacing apparently is different. Like it's not season one is book one. Apparently they've taken all the material and reshuffled it up to pace it differently.
Hmm.
Given what I've heard about the back half of the book, that may
That's
not
not
be
a
a
bad
bad
idea.
idea.
No. If you got 4 800-page books and nothing happens, you definitely need to adjust that for television viewing.
Right. Now, all of this said, we've talked about how Chris and I haven't really read this series, whatnot. If my research is to be believed, The Wheel of Time is the only fantasy series in the Western world that sells more than The Wheel of Time is Lord of the Rings. It is the second best fantasy series in the Western world, period.
I could see that because watching the series, I could tell that they must have liked Lord of the Rings a lot.
Right.
So much so that I'm not going to say they stole Lord of the Rings and put a dragon sheen over it, but those scales are pretty iffy.
So it's funny because I saw a lot of Game of Thrones in this too. It definitely feels like let's take the two fantasy IPs that made a ton of money and shove them into the same box, and then slap an IP name on it that everyone recognizes, and
Yeah.
make a show.
And having not read the books, I don't know if that is also how the book's vibe is.
Right.
Part of me is inclined to think it probably leans a lot more than Tolkien if they're obsessed with the concept of if I understand the Wheel of Time and how things churn and turn, it kind of goes into how there's like the different, like the first age, second age, third age in the Lord of the Rings.
Right. Again, from what I understand, is that the idea is that Robert Jordan wanted to kind of the, from what I understand, the intent is that he wanted to take Western fantasy and make it a little more blended with other world fantasy tropes to try to make it a little more universal. So
Yeah.
there's an explicit Buddhist idea that everything reincarnates, combined with a relatively Western sword and fantasy aesthetic. And I will say this show has mixed but better than we've seen so far results in terms of making it seem a little more universal.
Since we're here, I'm gonna do this up top instead of waiting for it to occur in the episode. This is not the first time I've tried to watch the series. I watched it when it first came out because I was
Mhm,
making a joke, but I like Rosamund Pike. I think she's a really good actress,
mhm,
and I wanted to give the show a chance. I bounced off of this show almost immediately, but I gave it 3 episodes actually
mhm.
when I first watched it when it first came out. And the colorism in this show was unbelievably offensive to me. Like just out and outright offensive. And I stopped watching it. And now I rewatched it for the podcast and I saw the 4th episode that I hadn't seen before.
Mhm.
And you know what? I'm still not going to watch any more of this show after we talk about it today.
Yeah, it is, we have, well, you primarily have been, very vocal about where are all of the people of color in these fantasy shows, and then the shows are, "Here's people of color," it's like, "Okay, but maybe not like that."
Yeah. And I know I don't think any of our listeners would do this, but you will say that there are people of color who are good protagonists. And that is true. And if I go into colorism, the darker their skin gets, the more evil they are.
Yep.
That's all I'm going to say about that, unless you have anything specific you want to say, because
No,
super
no,
offended.
no, there was one point in episode 2 where I almost called him a look at on this show. I almost got back using, "Maybe we don't need to cover this show."
Yeah.
I powered through, and you're right, episode 4, moderated my fears somewhat, but I'm with you. I'm also like everybody else I've talked to, probably not going to watch any further. And yet, I mean, I will say for all of this, um, there's a lot of things the show does really well, and I'll talk about when we do the recap, I think. But I can see why the show is getting a third season. And certainly for all of the frustrations of it, it is at least making something vaguely resembling an attempt to resolve the problems that we've addressed in all the other shows. Just the worst possible way.
So yeah, I don't
Anyway, anything else about the show as a whole before I go into episode 1? Because I'm going to do some more
know.
yelling.
Other than Rosamund Pike, did you know any of the other actors in this movie?
Um,
Sorry,
the
series.
woman who played Egwene looks familiar, but I don't know where I've seen her before.
Okay. Because otherwise, I
Otherwise,
had not
no.
seen any of these people before.
No. This seems like it's a relatively new and frankly relatively young cast, which is not a bad thing to do for what you hope to be a long-running fantasy series.
Yeah. It would cut down on budget and
Right.
potentially boost people's careers.
Right. Exactly.
Well, we can jump into it.
Okay. So, episode 1, Leave Taking. At the end of the last age, called the Age of Legends, the world was broken. In their arrogance, the male Aes Sedai, a lot of fantasy words here, I apologize. The male Aes Sedai
What
attempted to
you mean,
cage
like
the Dark One.
Aragorn, son of Arathorn?
Yeah. Attempted to cage the Dark One. The male half of the true source was corrupted, driving all male channelers insane. Leader of the male Aes Sedai, Luz Theron Telemann, was named the Dragon. The seas boiled, the land sank beneath the waves, and new lands appeared. Humankind were scattered to the four corners of the earth. Now the dragon's been reborn. In the White Tower, Moraine, Damerden, and Lan Mandagaron prepare to begin their mission to find him before the shadow does. And so we have a scene of a bunch of women chasing down a man with magical powers and straight up saying this power is for women alone. And already I was like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable where this is going.
I am in agreement with you. I will say them chasing him gave me flashback of Legend of the Seeker, though, for that chase scene at the start,
Yeah.
just reversed.
Mhm.
And when they stop him, and there's him and his buddy that he's been talking to, and they say, Madness has already taken you because of that power. There is no one else. And you flash back, and the buddy's gone. I like that beat. And then I heard the rest of what they're going to say.
Yes. Although it does remind me, how many of these shows have we watched which start with some form of people on horseback chasing someone in the woods?
Quite
It
a few.
happened in Beast Stalker. It happened in the Conan show.
Beastmaster,
Whatever.
Beastalker.
Beast fucker.
I
I don't
don't know
care.
what movie you're watching, Eddie, but it was Beastmaster.
Beastmaster. Beast Handler. Beastmeester.
So it did. I don't think it happened in Conan.
I thought there was a bit,
It
maybe
didn't
a later
start
one.
with it
It didn't start with, okay. It happened in Legend of
because
Seeker.
there was that boring ass movie. It was just,
Right.
actually not that many. It's just the fact that it's so, I think, associated with fantasy, and it happens
Yeah.
within an episode or two. Like it wasn't not necessarily how it started, but it happened quickly thereafter.
No, you're right, because there's no more iconic television fantasy scene than a bunch of people in strange clothing riding horses in the woods, right?
Yeah, because if you think about The Witcher started like in a swamp.
No, that's true. That's true. But it did eventually lead to a
Horses,
very strange looking man riding a horse running through the woods. So
but Roach is the best horses there ever were.
Roach is the best. Roach is the best character out of this entire run, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that was a good horse.
But yeah, I
After
mean, so
that,
first, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say after that, it really kind of meh.
Yeah, because my first thought was, is this going to be a show about angry feminists? Right? It's like, oh, if women controlled the world, look how bad things would be. I was like, oh, please don't be that. Please don't be that. But when I thought about it, I think what maybe they're trying to shoot for something closer to Dune.
How
You
so?
know, because in Dune, all the women had magical powers, and they held a different place in society. They now Dune had them as being uh, hunted down / subservient, right? Depending on which family you're talking about. Everyone's afraid of them. This is one where the female Aes Sedai are more explicitly in power. So it's a different power dynamic. And I will
So
say, later on in the show, it does seem like there's more of a parallel thing of women hold this role and men hold this role, but it's still so very traditional, and I use that term very reservedly, that it bothers me.
So unlike the Bene Gesserit from Dune, who are working from the shadows, these people have more reverence from the society that they're in.
Right, right. So it's
Um,
the I could see it, but it doesn't feel it feels different because of that power shift to me.
I guess I can see that, but I guess the other part of it is in Dune, there's not only the Bene Gesserit that are primarily women until Paul shows up. Modib,
Yeah.
is a minor Dune fan, but they also have things like the Mentats and everyone else that has an array of abilities that could be from any gender
Right,
to
but again,
balance that
both of
out.
them also have a bunch of women with mystical powers who have a myth that sometime a man will come and rule them, which is
So,
super fucking awkward.
well, it's much like the One Ring. There's one ring to rule them all, so you need that one person. Eddie, this is so bad.
Anything else about we still haven't gotten to the opening credits yet about this junk.
We didn't call him Mulligan how Eddie wanted to, which if you'd suggested that might have agreed. I liked the over the top acting from the lead as she comes and sort of like kills it, dude. I loved it. I loved that
Yes.
over the top acting so much that she brought that I actually Googled I think Kate Lockwood's her name to try to find
Oh,
other
yeah.
stuff that she might have been in so I can see if that is her consistent acting style or if it's just specifically for this. I haven't had time to go and do that yet, but it's on my list.
Right, and I will say, 'cause I'm trying to present this as how I saw it when I first saw it, but I will say, having after watching the rest of the episodes, it became increasingly clear that her over the top, overbearing personality is the character, right? That's the character she's been given. Um, it's just that when it's the very first thing you see, it sets a tone for the rest of the show, then the show then starts to undercut. So it's like, so kind of we talked about with the irregulars, it's like, wait, what is this show, right?
Mm-hmm. Now that you mentioned the irregulars, Watson, at least in the U.S., the show that we talked about with him as a medical doctor, drops. I want to say the 26th of January.
Mhm. I don't know if it's where it's gonna play here in the probably, let's see, it's CBS, right?
Yeah,
So maybe it'll be on Netflix, maybe it'll be on won't be on Disney Plus. I'll find a place I'll find a place where it's streaming over here. We'll figure it
and
out.
I finally saw a trailer because I didn't know what it was before. I didn't know there was going to be modern day. I thought they were going to go
Yeah,
old
yeah.
school with it, and it's
Mhm.
straight up modern day. Is a by the people that made Elementary, so that was interesting.
Yeah, as I understand it, it's basically the people who made Elementary are, trying to do something different, but it's kind of basically their take on House, which I'm not mad about that, you know?
My assumption then is that to show you how much I want to talk about Wheel of Time. My assumption is that Watson will not be set in the same universe as Elementary. Correct. I'm
Yes,
asking you
because
as
there was a Watson in Elementary already.
okay.
That was Lucy
Interesting.
Liu's character.
Okay. Parallel Earths. Cool.
Right.
Oh no, so we were saying the wheel of time turns and stuff happens.
Right. Okay, I'll go ahead and move on. Um,
How did you like the opening theme song and credits?
uh, I can't tell you because I forgot it immediately after I heard
Yeah, same.
it. It's the holiday of Beltane in the Two Rivers region of Andor, where days and nights filled with drinking and dancing. Egwene Alver, Rand al'Thor, Matt Catone, Perrin, Abia, and a bunch of other names. It's Egwene, Rand, Matt, Perrin, and Nineveh are in the Winespring Inn, most of the village
Um,
where Landon and Moraine arrive.
I'm sorry. You've got a bunch of friends and and you've all got really fantasy names, and then one of you's just Matt.
And Matt is the no. Rand is the generic white guy. Matt is actually more interesting. So it would be funnier if the generic white guy had been Matt.
You can go
It is
ahead. I
Matt
just
with
wanted
one
to
T,
highlight
but you can't
that.
hear that.
I just wanted to highlight. Da 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 da. Matt.
Right. So that's when Lan and Moraine arrive. Everyone's nervous because, oh, the Aes Sedai are here. Um, After things have settled down, Perrin returns to a smithy where his wife Layla has been working alone. Matt must take care of his little sisters due to his neglectful parents. Rand and Egwene spend some intimate time alone before Egwene tells Rand that she may become a Wisdom's apprentice, which upsets Rand because Wisdom never marries. And Wisdom is one of those that lead to the Aes Sedai, I believe. Another magical person. Outside in the storm, a black cloaked figure and a black horse enters the town. In their rooms, Lan and Moraine share a hot bath, and it's clear the Tremendous is platonic, yet very intimate. So, uh, I would admit, I was trying to, I gained a bit of hope because the Two Rivers town actually had some extremely diverse casting. I was like, oh, hey, look, people of color in a fantasy series, only took us 2021. Here we are.
I myself felt like that when I first watched it up to this point.
Right. Yep. So I was like, I had hopes. Um, but basically, this is just kind of this is the group of characters we're going to follow. A bit. This is where I was thinking about the Game of Thrones thing. It's a bit Game of Thrones in the sense of here are the characters we're going to introduce them all kind of in one central place, and then they're eventually going to break off. Although that didn't happen as fast as I thought it would. So I think more to your Lord of the Rings thing, it's also a bit of the gathering of the nine,
Yeah.
in degree too. So
Because part of it for me when I saw it, I was thinking there was a mix of when they pull the like the nine walkers together, but also inhabitant. Because when
right,
they start with Bilbo going around for his birthday party and all the different people, all the different groups, and that sort of tensions building. I felt that when I was watching this scene, but
right.
with a
Yeah,
diverse
no, I can
cast,
see that
which
because Egwene's kind of our Bilbo in that regard. She's the one who kind of talks to the characters, starts to draw them together.
so all that was nice. I was getting more Lord of the Rings vibe, but Lord of the Rings vibe with people of color. You're getting some sexy time like Game of Thrones. I was like, this is a good start. I'm starting to feel it because I'd seen the overtop acting that I liked because I just like overtop
Yeah,
acting, and it was pulling me in.
but again, like I was a little concerned because, like I said before, like none of this acting is over the top. This is it's slightly heightened. It's not naturalistic acting by any stretch of imagination, but still, it's much more subdued. And so it's like, okay, is this a class thing? Is it just because you're magic and you're over the top, which is perfectly valid? I mean, as far as I knew, the woman in red was a villain.
Yeah,
So it's like maybe she's just the villain. I don't know. So I wasn't concerned at this point in time. But I was like, okay, there's a tone shift happening here. I'm not quite sure why.
and then there was an interracial couple, which I also
Yeah.
liked.
Hmm.
So that was like speaking to me as a black man. I was like, yep, there we go, getting a little representation finally.
Okay.
That's what I thought right then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's watch the horror start to build in more sense than one. Next morning, the peddler Padden Farron arrives at the village with his trade wagon, and Matt's his best customer. Moraine and
Regardless
Lan.
of what I'm going to say shortly thereafter,
Mhm.
the character when he shows up is like oozing charm and charisma.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, very Han Solo-y. Moraine and Lan realize that a Fade has been through their village, which we find out pretty quickly is an evil creature in a black hood with a white face and teeth. Egwene tells Rand that she's going to become Ninevive's apprentice. At the sacred pool, Moraine questions Nynaeve to discover her age and her upbringing. Moraine keeps a close eye on Rand, Matt, and Perrin. Nynaeve and Egwene listen to the winds and hear something wrong. Listen to the winds is a magical spell. So actually, it's using something magical to listen to the wind. They realize something's wrong. Land discovers a herd of sheep slaughtered and arranged in the shape of a dragon's fang. In the village that night, murder interrupts the merriment as dozens of Trolloc, which are kind of fantasy monster creatures, they burst in, killing indiscriminately. Perrin and Layla hide in the smithy. Matt locates his sisters and hides with them in the woods. Egwene and Nynaeve find each other before Nynaeve is taken by the Trollocs. Before long, Moraine and Lan enter the fray. Moraine unleashes her fury at the Shadow Spawn to devastating effect, while Lan protects her back. The villagers rally, led by Dace Conger, and the smith Perrin and Layla fight for their lives, and in a blood rage, Perrin accidentally hits Layla and kills her. Moraine's final attack sweeps out the Trollocs and the Wine Spring Inn.
Do you know that that could have been one interpretation of the writers from Lord of the Rings, all black, everything else cruising around through town?
Mhm.
I'm just saying, like Lord of the Rings, all throughout this whole show.
Right. I can say that now. Um, but I mean, at this point, this is where my confusion gets up again because like now this is becomes a horror show again. I kept thinking of the irregulars because it's like, oh, this is horror, right? All this horrific things are happening. Um, this is the moment where my family member checked out because apparently Perrin does not kill Layla in the books, and that change tells me a lot about where this show is going.
Mm-hmm. So, in case you're listening and you haven't seen, in case you're listening to this without having watched the show, Perrin is a light skinned black man
Mhm,
who's married to a white woman, and there seemed to have been like a loving marriage they're in, and they have the character break down into a fit of rage. The only character that breaks into a fit of rage, I'll point out in this combat, to
mhm.
kill one of the Trollocs or whoever they are. Like rage, 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 and then kills his wife, who was coming to help him. I was done. Right there,
Apparently,
I was.
apparently, it did not happen in the books at all. So that was a specifically a mention of the show.
Do we know why that was added to the show, other than to make
No,
Chris decide not to like it?
I don't know. This is why my theory has been they're trying to be Game of Thrones edgy, but not using sex. Instead, using horror. That's why I kept going to Game of Thrones because that unnecessary inclusion of edge just permeated my entire watching of this.
Because I'm also going to point out that the only person that lost a family member this entire fight was that character
Mhm.
out of everybody.
Right.
And a slight jump ahead, I think, from where you are. And when they leave town, that is the only person that doesn't have someone looking at them or them giving a farewell to, which is then undercut later. I'm giving minor spoilers for a show I don't care about, where they mention specifically their family that still lives in town. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to figure out why they would have done that specifically to that character. And I keep coming back to the things I mentioned about beforehand.
Right. Um, for me, I mean, I wasn't thinking about that component, and I also didn't know about the murder being a different thing when I first watched this episode. Um, I was more getting concerns that Lan, who is played by an Asian man, is the appears to be the explicit servant of a white woman.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a later episode. This episode implies that there's more there, but the power dynamic was not erased in my mind when I saw that scene. It took a later episode to make that relationship of equals much clearer, but it is. I think the writers probably thought, "Oh, it's clear now." It absolutely wasn't. Of course, he's going to say nice things to her if he is her servant, right?
Yes.
There's nothing in that contradicted their he's being nice to her just because she's his owner. Again, that's not actually what it is. But this show has first episode keeps putting stuff in front of itself. Now, it did launch the first 3 episodes simultaneously, and that was probably good because if it was just 1 episode, probably would have had a very different audience reaction.
And it doesn't help given the first scene was a woman with powers that then was executing a man to then
Right.
have him be subservient to her, falling to her third, and we know that she has powers.
Right. And everyone's scared of her. And a woman who's dressed very nice walks into a town of people who are dressed much more simply, and everyone's terrified of her. Yes, vocally, everyone's saying, "Oh, it's because she's one of the Aes Sedai," but as far as we know, that could just be because she's a noble.
Well, let's establish it's a white woman that walks to a town of almost a fully like diverse and marginalized people
Yes.
primarily
Right.
she's engaging with, all of which are afraid of her and subservient.
Right. Mhm.
Like most of the town that we see interact with her fall within the marginalized groups and they are subservient and afraid of her.
Right. Yep. Yeah. The Trolloc? Trollocs look cool.
Do you know what they reminded me of?
Lord of the Rings
Fourth
orcs.
Doctor. What's that? No, Fourth Doctor. The Nimrods when he gets trapped, and there's a Minotaur-like creature that he has to fight.
Wow, that was not a good episode.
No, but that's what it reminded me of when I saw him. That's the
Wow.
first thing that came to mind.
Wow. Now I can't unsee that, so thank you for that gift.
You're welcome. That's what you get for having a signed picture of Tom Baker in your background. You always make me watch every single time we do this.
I will point out that now officially he is Sir Tom Baker because he's gotten his MBE. Finally.
Mm, nice. That's good to hear. He
Show
should have
respect.
gotten a long time ago.
Yeah, I completely agree. At least he got done finally. Anything else about this scene?
So, all of my other stuff aside, approaching it with a more analytical hat, I think the display of magic that they had for Rosamund Pike was incredible. To see how the magic actually functioned, how it is visually engaging to look at when it shoots around and everything else, was a
Mhm.
very nice touch. I'm putting on more analysts than actual Chris hat. And those aspects of it were nice. Even though we know that her bodyguard, is what we'll call him for the moment, is and how they function together was a good dynamic to see that they've been doing this for a while.
That's interesting. I didn't have that same reaction, but now that you've said it, right? I'm now mentally comparing it to like say the Seeker, which had very different level of special effects, much lower. Um, because in my head, it's like it's an Amazon series 2021. Of course, it's going to look good. So that in my head is no longer good enough, right? But given how we're supposed to be analyzing this, that's not entirely fair. This is not a Netflix, not an HBO. This is a relatively, at this point in time, not scrappy, obviously, but still certainly
They had a smaller budget.
yeah, smaller. They had a smaller budget and doing a lot more with it. So now that you say that, I'm actually mentally readjusting my appraisal of it because you're right. It is visually very good. I have just got such high expectations, but you're right. This isn't a Netflix. This isn't a major studio at the time. So they did a really good job of making sure the magic not only looked good, but also because we're gonna see a lot more magic in the next few episodes, looks consistent. Magic is not random. They all look like they're tied to the same tradition, for lack of a better term.
And unlike any other shows, this magic actually require, at least for the combat scene, requires more physical movement and to show that it's doing something
True,
and to be directed.
true.
And we could
Because
say in
trollocs are
later,
flying and people are moving out of the way, and
yes, and she's directing like forces as she does it to show that it's a full body movement, and just not like for Gerald, like a hand wave and something happens. Or the sorceress from Beastmaster, stuff happens with like
right,
finger
right.
waves.
Yes. I'm gonna wave my hand, then we're gonna do a cut, and then things have changed, right? Yeah, no, it's definitely better than all that. And now that we say it, I also wonder how much of that was inspired by the Doctor Strange movie, because also Doctor Strange movie had lots of magic choreography, for lack of a better term.
True. Probably
So
quite a bit.
so yeah, not so in that case, maybe I'll actually accept. Maybe I was judging it a little unfairly at that point.
So that is something I can definitely comment on and how nice that was. And you get to see that when she gets hurt, her power level seems to drop because she can't do the same movements. So there
Right.
are things
Mhm.
like that that are nice aesthetic to make it flow better. I still have my other issues with it, but if I'm judging it strictly on that performance and the visuals, high praise for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. Back at the Altar farm, a Synchrotronic bursts into the house and surprises Rand and Tam, but they manage to kill it by working together. Tam is injured, and Rand carries his father towards the village. At daybreak, Rand enters the
Wait, you skipped a vital part of this, Eddie.
Please tell me what vital part I skipped.
From our understanding, Tam is a mere farmer. He breaks out like a fucking case with like a magic sword of some kind in it, and is, to the best of our knowledge now, a swordsman from nowhere. I am humble farmer. I am now expert swordsman, implying
Uh,
like a whole deep level of history that character has.
to be fair, I actually did miss that. But also, I guess I'm so trains of course, the humble woodsman in a random village is secretly an adventurer because that's how all of these stories start. So I kind of just
But
actually glossed over that. But yeah,
we
no, it's
we
fair. That's
give
fair.
we give more shout outs for the tropes that we like in Doctor Who and stuff like that. So I feel that
That's
we
fair.
need to
No,
try to
that's fair.
give
Yeah,
the same fantasy ones.
that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Um, Rand enters the village with Tam, and Moraine heals Tam with the one power. Matt returns with the sisters from where they've been hiding together. Perrin emerges with Layla's body and a terrible secret, which is that he won't tell. He doesn't tell anybody that he actually killed her. He implies that the Trollocs did. Moraine tells Rand, Matt, Perrin, and Egwene that one of them is the Dragon Reborn, and the Trollocs is coming for them, not the village. Suddenly, another larger Trolloc horde approaches from the distant hills. The group reluctantly flees to the Two Rivers with Lan and Moraine heading for Tar Valon. So basically, we find out that the reason why all this magic stuff's happening is because the dragon, which was the male power holder that broke the world, has been reborn into one of them, and that these two have been, Ace and I have been trying to find the dragon for, I think in one line they mentioned 20 years. And so these Trollocs are coming after whoever is the dragon. So you don't know one of them is the dragon. And at this point, I was, warts and all, I was kind of invested because I was like, I like the idea of an adventuring party where one of you is an unknowing traitor. It's kind of a neat concept. It's very uh, uh, like werewolf or whatever it is. Like one of you has a is potentially a dark side. But as soon as I thought that, I thought if it's Perrin, I'm gonna fucking murder somebody.
uh, I, on the other hand, was not deeply involved in this at all because I was
Mhm.
thinking if their concern is that one of them will acquire power and establishing in the first scene that the power only drives males mad, why would she then be focusing more of her attention on, I don't know what her name is, but that one woman? Wouldn't she be more concerned about one of the males having that power and going mad? Because my brain had already checked out for the series, so I switched into full logic Chris mode. So I'm looking for issues.
Right, right, right. Um, I mean, I kind of because we don't know how reincarnation works. I mean, we don't know necessarily that people reincarnate across gender lines. So it could be that a woman could reincarnate, but I could also implies that the Aes Sedai try to find women of power and train them as quickly as possible to avoid that exact scenario. So I had kind of read it as, oh, Egwene, you have power. Let me pull you off the side and quickly make sure that you're not going to secretly be the supervillain that destroys the world. Cool, cool.
So for me, it was based because they made this specifically about gender. Even if she was male and reincarnated, then she would no longer be male in this incarnation of herself. From how they talked about the breaks in them.
Which brings up a whole trans narrative that would be fascinating if the show remotely wanted to engage with it.
Correct. Hence, more of my frustration with this show.
Right, right. It's frustrating because when you try to give the show credit, it finds new ways to undermine you. Because it's like, "Oh, hey, what about this?" Like, "Oh, yes, but then we have biological gender." Oh, great.
So yeah, it's messy, and I don't know if that's in the books. So that's why I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
what you knew about Robert Jordan themselves, or so yeah.
I honestly I don't know, frankly, because I don't know much tells me a lot. I mean, because if he had been a shit show, um, I probably would have heard about it by now, but also he died right before public social media became a thing. So, you know, eh. Um, he apparently was friends with Brandon Sanderson, who from all appearances seems to be a reasonably good dude. So I'm willing to give credit where credit is due. Um, because Sanderson is someone who I've only started reading Sanderson a little bit. But from what other fans have told me is that his initial books were pretty white and had some gender balance issues, but he has corrected that over time and has made explicit changes in future books. So
That's good
that
to
tells
hear.
me a lot. So without other knowledge, I'm going to put a lot of this in the showrunners because I have explicit, definitive evidence that they have changed core plot points to suit their narrative. So I'm going to put this all on the showrunners.
Okay. Right now, what I'm seeing is that Frodo and Sam are leaving Hobbiton to go and take care of the One Ring because they haven't met Merry and Pippin yet.
Right.
We're going to get to that in a minute next episode.
Right. Do you want to talk about episode 2?
We're here.
Shadows Waiting. Aemon Valda, an inquisitor for the Children of the Light, burns an Aes Sedai of the Yellow Aja to stake. He retrieves her great serpent ring from one of her severed hands and adds it to a handful already his belt. Aemon Sedai is black. Aemon Valda is black. Very, very black man. And he enjoys being evil. He very clearly enjoys torturing people and being evil. And literally, my note in my document is, "Oh, cool! Another evil black man. Cool."
So, if I'm not mistaken, he also consumes part of that human being.
Yes, although he does consume a bird first and talks about how the bird claws and beak cut the blood, and that blood and effectuates the taste of the bird. So he's already starting off super fucking creepy.
So, in case you're curious, I'm sorry. What we did forget from the previous episode is the charismatic, dark-skinned black man that showed up that was a Han Solo type is the reason that the entire town gets killed or attacked by all the monsters because he sold them out.
He's being by the Trollocs, yeah.
So there you go. That's your other super dark-skinned man in the first episode. Your dark-skinned man in this episode is a villain burning one of the people who we consider to be good people and eating them and gleefully doing it.
Right. Before the credits even roll, we see this. Like, very first thing you see is this bullshit. Right, yeah. So you can see why this is the point where I was just like, I want to watch the rest of the episode, but I'm seriously concerned right now. So, Moraine, Lan, Rand, Matt, Perrin, and Egwene still fleeing the Trolloc army. And they arrive at Terran Ferry and cross the river just in time before the Trollocs can get them. Moraine ensures the Trollocs won't follow using magic, and her methods are cold and severe. She basically lets people die, and there's a very clear distinction in order to make that happen.
So this is the scene. Right before the scene is where we would meet Merry and Pippin. Mm-hmm. And then the 4 hobbits flee, and they go to the lake, and they get on a boat in the movie Fellowship of the Rings. They get on the boat and cross over the lake with like the riders looking at them as they escape over the water. I think these people fled and escaped over the water too.
You're starting to sell me on this principle here.
Just saying. But they added in the Game of Thrones bit by making sure that people knew that people on that side of the river died, and then she sank the boat.
Right. But, I mean, to your point, also, the Two Rivers folk here start to wonder if they can trust Moraine, which is similar to the Hobbits wondering if they can trust Gandalf. So, when stopping to rest for the night, Moraine begins to instruct Egwene in the ways of the Aes Sedai, as Moraine can sense the spark of channeling within Egwene. The next morning, the Two Rivers folk discovered they had all too real nightmares involving dead bats, including one of them crawling out of someone's mouth, and a man whose eyes and mouth are caverns of fire, because in case it wasn't clear, this is a horror show. The tension snaps and Rand argues with Moraine, but she calls his bluff, and the rest of the group eventually follows her, forcing Rand to continue as well. The party is met on the road by a force of the Children of Light, led by Lord Captain Geoffrey Bornhald, and accompanied by Aemon Valda, evil black man. Moraine must hide who she is, and Lan have to navigate around the 3 oaths, one of which prevents her from lying. After some questioning, Valda allows the party to go along, although he's very interested in the group. Later, the Two Rivers folks sing of Maratharin, although they do not know what it is they sing of, and Moraine tells them the history of their heritage and their ancient ancestry. It's a lot, but I have thoughts.
The only other point I'm going to mention about their black man to reinforce this is that in a very disturbing way, they had him groping her to look for her ring, in addition to all that.
I actually had that note and then deleted it because I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about that. But you're right.
I'm putting it in the, if we're gonna go down the
Without
road about
consent, he
horrible
straight up touches a woman.
stereotypes,
Yes. Hmm.
we're gonna talk about all of them, or at least highlight them so people understand and see them and they can find them in the future for themselves.
No, that's fair because he touched specifically. He touches. I noticed he touched her hair, which is a very he touched her hair without consent, which is a very creepy thing, and also something that happens frequently in the reverse.
Yep.
Happens to black women a lot.
Like I have grabbed people's arms who tried to touch my daughter's hair
Hmm.
without asking or looking. And when I say people, I mean white people in case there's any
Right. Hmm.
lack of distinction, who just reach out to touch her hair.
Right.
And I grab their arm before they do it and they look at me and I look back at them and they go, "Oh, you're right."
Hmm. Right. Um, so to scroll back a little bit, Moraine starts to talk about Egwene, and she talks about the three oaths, which when I was watching this, almost immediately reminded me of the three laws of robotics that Isaac Asimov did, because they're basically it's the you can't lie, you can't directly harm people, and you can't actively use magic unless it's in self defense or very specific caveats.
For me, it reminded me of Obi-Wan almost instantly. It's true from a certain point of view or whatever it was. Is the instant thing I got when she said this, like, "Oh, they've tossed in
Right.
Star Wars."
Right. But
Another
certainly,
fantasy series.
well, yes, absolutely. But both of those, the iRobot series and Star Wars, do have a certain amount of here are these sacrosanct moral laws that we're going to immediately find loopholes around.
Hmm. Now that we're talking about it, since we've recently covered it, it also reminded me of Highlander because they think they have their three essential rules or whatever it was
Oh
too.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're not thou shall nots, but it's there could be only one. You can't find holy grounds.
And
And
something else.
yeah, the final one will get the gift. I mean, basically, but yeah, they're three rules. Three rules are a very common trope. So this is another one. But again, like that, I thought of Asimov specifically because Asimov was famous for if you try to programmatically install morality, it will fail. That was his whole point of the three laws of robotics: is that you cannot have a rules based morality. And so the show does seem to be playing with that, and actually has quite a lot of, um, I didn't lie when they stopped me. I simply gave them a certain information in a certain way that caused them to come to their own assumptions.
And it's true, and that's constantly like shown up in almost every form of media. We could say Skynet is like the ultimate one,
Yeah.
but it
Mhm.
also goes back to when you're engaging with robots and you say protect humanity, and they go, "All right," and it comes to the conclusion the best way to protect humanity is to eradicate humanity so that it doesn't hurt itself.
Yep. Right. So it was interesting to see a bit of sci-fi pacing on this, which again, um, for those of you who know, is a bit Brandon Sanderson specifically, because one of the things that he's known for is having very explicit and intricate rules of magic. And nothing violates those rules of magic, although occasionally there are loopholes, but those are loopholes that you can understand if you know the rules of magic. Brand Sanderson's very good at having clear, not clear, but um, rigid rules of magic that don't get broken, as opposed to a lot of fancy writers who are like, yeah, but then this thing happens.
Yeah. Then I may pick up some of his later work and check it out.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I did appreciate a little bit. Again, too little, too late, I think. But Rand, who is a mediocre white man, basically yelling at a bunch of women, saying, "I can't have power. Why are we doing this? I don't want to do that." And the rest of the group going, "We're going to go do this." Because again, he's like, "Why are we following her? We don't know anything about her." And someone very logically points out, "The lady does shoot fireballs, so maybe let's stay on her good side." And it's like, you're just being a petulant white man. And so it's like, okay, because of the dynamics of the characters that were present, that scene was interesting, but it was also like, so I was like, maybe this will pull out of his nosedive, but we'll find later. It doesn't quite do, but it's like, there's an attempt here. There's something that's clearly happening here, but it also feels like maybe one writer in the writer's room got this thing stuck out there.
And you also have, I don't remember her name, but she pointed out specifically that she is the only reason that they are still alive. and the only person actively protecting them.
Right. So it is uh, the pragmatics of the situation compared to your random ideology, and misplaced ideology. And again, because the person speaking it is a white cis man, that sends a certain message. I'm at this point assuming it was accidental. I'm assuming that was just we cast this way and it happened to be that Rand Happy's line, so it happened to play this way. I can't believe it's intentional because of how the other rest of the show was panned out, but it was a neat
Yeah,
moment for me.
I agree. I liked it. Very good.
And then the song, something I've been thinking about as we do this run is music, specifically music that was created for a fantasy world, is a very common trope. Goes all the way back to Tolkien. Tolkien had songs in the One King One Out. And I've been noticing, particularly with The Witcher and moving forward, taking those because a lot of the music is written just as text on the page. There's no notation with it. So whoever's adapting it has to slash has the opportunity to create any melody they want to as long as it fits that structure. And watching a slow modernization of musical theory creeping into these fantasy shows. Um, Obviously, Tossed According to Your Witcher is a banger, right? It's an amazing song because it's a pop song that just happens to be in a fantasy setting, right? The fact that we talked about how so many different covers are done because the actual structure of the song is popular music, so it can be easily recovered in different modes because it has that modern core underpinning. And this song is similar. In fact, is that when I was listening to it, I was like, "This is actually a really good song." It's not anything close to Toss According to Your Witcher, right? It's nowhere near that good, but it's still a good song to listen to. I actually enjoyed listening to it while it was being sung, and assuming the actors doing their own singing was actually well performed.
Hmm. Nice.
I didn't care a jot about the material, and afterwards, when she info dumped about it, I was like, "I genuinely don't care. Shut up. Go back to the song. Stop talking. I don't care about Man Around or whatever." That song is pretty cool.
Oh, okay. Nothing compares to Toss Corner Witcher. It didn't even register for me.
Yeah, right. And frankly, I think the only reason why I noticed it was because I was starting to drift at this point. And I was like, "Oh, hey, it's a pretty good song." So, which I've been also like a lot of how people digressing, but who cares? Um, there's been studies done that people remember information better when it rhymes. That is why a lot of bad advice still gets propagated. For example, "Go woke, go broke." It's bad advice. It's objectively wrong advice, but it rhymes, so people keep repeating. That is the reason why a lot of stories in the Middle Ages through the Renaissance was told in a rhyming couplet because it was easier for people to remember speaking it, but also it stuck in people's heads more because of the rhyming structure. So songs and things presented in songs tend to be remembered longer than just normal prose as a result, unless the prose is particularly strong. So I've been thinking about that, like how fantasy settings approach music and how they use that to communicate the history and the setting of their world. This setting, this one village has a song that they all sung, but they've lost all of the historical context. And so the scholars like, let me tell you actually what it all means, which actually kind of ruins the song. The Witcher is literally just about a guy saying, "Hey, pay my freelancer friend, stop being sponges." It tells you very different setting structures.
Oh god.
Anyway, uh, that night as they camp, Moraine is the worse for wear and finally succumbs to her wound and the exertion of the journey, slipping into unconsciousness. Just then, the
Hey,
Trollocs finally catch
do you
them.
know
What?
who else had a wound inflicted on them
Would it
from
be Frodo by chance?
it could be. And you know what happened to Frodo? He's a
He
camp.
died.
All right, you go ahead.
He died. No,
I'm
Frodo died. He's dead. I know what you're talking about. Gollum is the hero of that movie. Um,
Hey, don't you be insulting Frodo. That's Sam's love interest. I want you to respect that.
no, I apologize. You're right. Sam is the hero of that movie. I apologize. Um, the Trollocs catch the group, and their land takes the group to flee to the dead city of Shadar Logoth, where even Trollocs and Fades fear to enter for reasons.
Huh.
In the city,
Would it didn't occur to me until you said the name of the city out loud.
Shadow Logoth?
Do you know what that
Shoggoth?
sounds a lot like?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shoggoth. It didn't occur to me until you said it right then, and just sort of went click.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. There's it's the well, anyway. Um,
It just goes
in the
back to how
city.
you're talking about this is a horror series by doing that, and then what happens in the city. Just
Okay, well, yeah. Well, since we're here, I mean, we're gonna talk about Shadow Logoth in a second, but I mean, to me, I felt the hard shift into traditional literary Conan, right? Um, and the idea that all magic is ultimately evil, and you go into these abandoned entire cities that have been corrupted and reduced to ruin because of the avarice and the mentality of the rulers, and like that's straight up fucking Robert E. Howard. So if you're gonna do fantasy horror, stealing from Robert E. Howard is a really great choice.
yeah, absolutely. All right, sorry to interrupt, but that just really just
No, no,
hit
that's a good
me like
point. It's
a
a good point.
gong over the head.
In the city, Matt finds a dagger sheathed in gold with a large ruby set in the hilt, totally not evil or cursed. Before long, the group's horses are found, and one is consumed by Matashar, and the group is split into three as they flee for their lives from the shadowed evil. Perrin and Egwene are forced to leap from the top of the wall in the river. Rand and Matt escape through a drain port at the base of the wall, and Lan carries Moraine and gallops the remaining horses out of the city. Lan is caught by surprise in the forest, where Niamh, who is alive and been tracking him, finally catches up. So, um, all the stuff in Shadow of Goth I actually liked, and I thought, okay, you know what? I'm glad I actually stuck with this. Maybe that was a moment at the top of the episode. This is actually kind of fun.
Do you know who else got trapped in a underground city that all brought death to the team and kind of split them up?
Yeah, Tyrion Lannister. Yeah. Because I'm
They were
actually
not.
right. I know what you're going for, but also I am also true.
You are also correct. I was going for the Mines of Moria, but you stick with your
Yes,
Game of Thrones, my friend.
right. Um, I mean, I was annoyed that Matt found a dagger, and it's like, oh, I found a dagger. It's not been burned, and it's like it looks fine. I go, hey, you're now cursed, so we know where that storyline's going, right? It's like I immediately know what's going to happen with you.
Just because the person told you do not touch anything, don't touch anything, and you go, huh, maybe I'll touch that.
Which again, knowing that these stories are written, these characters are teenagers makes way more sense. Because you of all people know, tell a kid don't do a thing. What are they going to
Oh my God.
do?
You'd be better off saying go touch everything. They go, well, fuck you, I ain't doing that. I'm gonna sit
Oh,
here.
that's
You
stupid.
got me,
God,
kid.
what? Trying to get you killed, Dad? What the hell? Um, and then like the horse, like obviously CGI horse gets just disintegrated, but still it's creepy as fuck.
Yeah. That was probably one of my favorite scenes from the whole thing. I was thinking the whole time,
Yeah,
poor Roach. What's Gerald gonna do
yeah,
now?
yeah. Or that one horse from Neverending Story
Mm.
in the swamp.
Hey, do you remember the time when Bill the pony was attacked by that sea monster before they went to the Mines of Moria? I do. All right, in case it's not obvious, I do not like the series. I will stop making Fellowship of the Ring jokes for like the last 10 minutes of the podcast.
Right. Um, but I realized a couple things when we got through Shadow Logoth, which I just keep saying because it's just a great sounding city. Like I just love the name of that city. Um, one, the only character I actually like at this point is Egwene.
Why is that?
Um, because she's the only character who seems to actually not have extremely obvious archetype or arc. Right? None of these characters have. I read a review accidentally because I was looking up something else, and I stumbled across the review. And the only line I caught, which stuck with me, is that none of these characters act like human beings. And by the time I got here, I was like, Egwene actually acts like a human being. Everybody else acts like a plot mandated character. Um, and that frustrated me because I was like, I like the actor of Egwene. She seemed to bring a lot of heart to the role. Um, and every time she's seen with somebody else, I can see the other actor almost kind of stepping up to match her.
Yeah, I can see
So
that.
it that's a lot of I think the actor brought to that. Um, but the other thing that bothered me about this scene is, and something I've been seeing a lot in the past, particularly 5 years. as we get increasingly reliant on CGI, is that you have to be really, really good at managing your actors, particularly in action scenes when you use a lot of CGI. Because when the darkness comes in, the idea is that it's a it's a very obvious, but we built this cast of character. Now we're going to split them three ways, and then we're going to have three plot lines following them. Like very Game of Thrones. Now we're in a very clear Game of Thrones dynamic, where we're going to cut between different groups. So it's overwrought, but it works. But the thing is that the idea is that the darkness is actually literally cutting around the ground around them, and so there's several times where people are fleeing for their lives, and you see a chunk of darkness kind of curl around like beside them or alongside them, and they have zero reaction to this thing happening alongside of them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the animators got too creative with what they were doing and weren't actually looking at the blocking of the scene. And so it looks like the characters are just ignoring very obvious danger right next to them.
Absolutely. I noticed that myself, but you articulate it perfectly.
Yeah. So it was very frustrating. And I admit I didn't enjoy that Rand and Egwene had a fight prior to this. So one of the subplots I dropped was that the reason why Rand is mad is because, as we talked about in the first episode, he doesn't want Egwene to become a wisdom because wisdoms can't marry, and he's clearly in love with her. So he is now lashing out to any kind of female authority as a result. Egwene, to her credit, calls him on his bullshit earlier on this episode and is like, "Why are you doing this?" And he kind of does, oh, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, "No, you're doing it because you don't want what happened to me, but I actually have a choice in what happens to me." And straight up calls him out on this. And then he goes, "Okay, fine." When they come to Shadar Logoth, they reconcile and then immediately get split up. And I'm like, again, I know where this is going to go now because they're going to pine after each other for the whole time they're separated. And like, I would have actually liked it better if they were split up
together,
having still had that fight.
Oh, see, I think I would like it better if they were split up together as a couple to then go on their journey. Yeah.
That could have worked too, honestly. But having them have a very meaningful and interesting conversation to then more or less shove it under the rug and then get separated was the worst possible option of the options available to them, I think.
Agreed. It undercuts a lot of tension that could have been there.
Do you have anything else about this episode?
Did you like the shadow special effect creeping out, other than the fact it was badly animated with him running, but the effect itself as it crept?
Yeah, the effect itself was great, honestly. And I don't know how much of the city was practical and how much the city was CGI, but it looked like it was about a mix, and the whole thing looked great, frankly. The whole city looked creepy as hell. It was one of the better set pieces of the whole series to this point for me.
And so I don't know if it's going to stay consistent throughout the series, but I do like the fact that Rosamund Pike's character can't heal herself, but can heal other people.
Yes, that is apparently a point of consistency, I found out.
That is a super nice touch that I love.
Right. Which was a early thing because they were thinking, she's like, "Hey, I'm going to meet my sister because she can help me because I'm injured." And they're like, "You don't have a and so her lie is that all Aes Sedai are my sisters, all women are my sisters. It's like, yeah, that's true. But like, oh, well, why can't you just heal yourself? It's like, well, I can't. I literally can't. So you're right. I like that because as frustrated as I am, I do continue to like the fact that magic has clear rules, even if we, the audience, don't know them all yet. And the show so far has been playing by its own rules. So if it sets a rule down, it's been pretty consistent after that. That's been true. Because, like, for example, the Three Oaths, I went back and rethought some of the conversations earlier, and she did never lie. She just omitted very specific information, which I and any philosopher would tell you is still lying. But apparently, according to Three Oaths, is fine.
I, as someone that loves technicality, will tell you that it is perfectly fine.
Technically correct is the best kind of correct.
That's it. I got nothing else for this episode.
Okay. So episode 4, Dragon Reborn. We skipped episode 3. Frankly, the recap told me everything I needed to know for episode 3. I didn't watch it. But we are now in Game of Thrones, flashing back and forth. So I'm going to tackle each thread as opposed to bouncing around. First, we have a very short flashback, which is none of the threads, where Logain Ablar and his army capture the capital city of Glenblal. Logain holds the life of the king in his hands. Basically, Logain believes himself to be a dragon reborn, and we see a flashback that he captured an entire city and subjugated the king. I have no idea what leads to this. I have no idea where it goes, but apparently he is a male magic user and he is a badass. And also during that scene, different shadow people are talking to him in his head, although at one point in time they actually manifest, although it looks like nobody else can see them.
And the shadows look identical to the shadows that chased our heroes out of the castle.
Right. And the piece we missed is that Logain is claiming to be the Dragon Reborn, but he is captured at the point this episode starts. In current time, Lan, Nyanaeve, and Moraine receive food and rest at the Aes Sedai camp. And finally, Moraine gets healing from Kareen Nagashi, who's the captain general of the Green Aja, who lead the Aes Sedai transporting the captive Logan, which is the Dragon Reborn, allegedly. Moraine discovers conflict between Leandra of the Red Aja, who is the woman we saw at the very beginning of episode 1, who wants to gentle Logain. And gentle is a euphemism for cutting someone off from their power.
Do you think they play Dragon Age?
I know Dragon Age was a thing in Dragon Age.
So it's, I think, what they call when they quiet one of the mages in that game. Given
how long this show's been around, I expect my Dragon Age maybe cribbed it from Wheel of Time, put the other way around. But yes, okay. I expect there's maybe a connection there.
Because I'm pretty sure it's been a long time since I played Dragon Age, but I specifically remember I think it was a term. That was a term.
I will say, since we're here, I did like how they're, and this is something I attribute more to Robert Jordan, established this setting that feels lived in. The idea that they have a euphemism for cutting someone off their power in the same way that we use neutralize for kill. The idea that we gentle someone without really explaining it until no one actually says this is what gentling means. It's something you have to pick up from context from the conversations that are happening around the Dragon Reborn. So I like the fact that this is a lived-in term that everyone understands, but we as the audience don't quite understand. It makes the world feel more real in a very tangible way. But anyway, Leandrin wants to gentle him. Kareen, who's again the captain of the Green Aja, wants to return Logain to Torvalen for trial. Alana of the Green Aja is the only other Aes Sedai in the camp strong enough to shield Logain, because all of the Green Ajas are doing their power into shielding him to keep him captured. Leandrin takes special interest in Nyanaeve, but she spends most of her time with Lan and the other warders and continues to grow closer to Lan. Tension builds between Kareen and Leandrin until as they continue to have their debate about what to do, until the camp falls under attack by Logain's followers, who try to free him. He does actually break free, and when Moraine, Leandrin, and Kareen attempt to reshield him, his counterstroke actually kills Kareen. Stepan, feeling Kareen's death, her male counterpart, attempts to get revenge on Logain, but the false dragon shatters his axes, mortally wounding everyone else in the room. Nyanaeve, refusing to let Lan die, touches the one power for the first time and unleashes a massive burst of power, instantly healing everyone in the room. The Aes Sedai link with Leandrin, and she captures shields that then gentles Logain, cutting him off from the one power forever. So that's a lot. There's a lot happened there. So, on the one hand, in this chunk is the part where we see that the male partners of each Aes Sedai has their own male partner who's called Warder. And that they have a very intimate relationship that is implied does not need to be sexual, but then another scene heavily implies that it is frequently sexual. Because there are two warders who are very clearly a homosexual couple who then go to have a threesome with their Aes Sedai.
Yeah. There are so many different power dynamics here that I'm not even sure where to begin.
Right. And it's like, part of me was like, I wish I had known this 3 episodes ago. because I would have had a very different takeaway from the first couple of episodes. This does make things more interesting, but then how they frame everything is so couched in euphemism and knowing looks that it leaves it leaves too much to the imagination, and therefore it doesn't actually resolve anything. It doesn't make anything better. It just makes things more confusing to me.
Mhm. And then do we want to try to get into the fact where for like that couple, is it a matter of they're going for the distinction? There's a difference between love and what potentially just be sex is like a whole other discussion.
Right.
So I don't know. I just know that I am uncomfortable with the lack of answers or clearly stated anything for it based on what I've seen up to this point.
The other piece that complicates things, but again, like I think in a stronger narrative team could be genuinely interesting, is because we see Logain directly manipulating people's emotions. We saw it in the flashback. He directly manipulates someone. He manipulates the king's emotions, and because of all the followers and the way they're acting, very much implies that they are emotionally manipulated as well. So he very likely has these people following him, not because he's genuinely altruistic, but because he's just using magic to manipulate them. Um, it opens the question of how much do the Aes Sedai do the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is never adequately answered,
No.
but it does. For me, it was I had about 20 minutes like, oh, this is really interesting. But then as I thought it through, I wrapped around to so Lan could still be a slave.
Yes.
So
Because
like, because you made it muddy, you didn't answer the question, actually made the initial problem that much worse.
their relationship specifically reminds me of Legend of the Seeker with the
Yes.
confessor who took over that village. That is what this entire thing reminds me of, where they
But the
act as if they have
confessor
their own free
or
will, but they are subjected to her will, whatever it is.
right, but I feel like they handled the confessor dynamic much better in The Seeker of all things, Legend of the Seeker.
It, it was clear. They showed you like they built it up because there's Richard and well, I forgot her name now. But if she confesses him, we know what happens, and we've seen that throughout it. And then she makes an active choice. Then we have one of her sisters who actively confesses an entire group of people, and they show you that. Here, they don't want to show you that because they don't want to come off one way or the other, and that makes it worse.
Um, and I mean, I like the fact that the Aes Sedai use different colors to kind of indicate their different roles in their society. And in fact, they have different outfits. They're not quite uniforms. It's you can kind of wear what you want, but as long as you have to incorporate the color into your scheme somehow. And then the warders also inherit some of that color as a result. There's an interesting implication of a more established and grounded society that's happening here, but it's frustrating that all the storytelling is happening in linguistics and costuming and CGI and not in dialogue, right?
Because the one piece of dialogue that we got that I liked related to that is that in some fashion they get to choose the color they take, which is nice because someone said that I almost took the X or Y. So it implies they have some agency over which one they get to be.
Right. But there's also similarly a line that you reminded me of, where the fact that at least emotional manipulation does occur in some direction is because when Lan goes back to talk to Moraine, he had been drinking, and then she starts getting kind of maudlin, and he flat says, "I knew I shouldn't have drank because you always get emotional when I drink." And because he was nowhere near her, it's not a you get emotional because you watch me drink, which is an interesting dynamic. Because I've been around alcoholics my entire life and I've seen that happen. That's not what's happening here. It's very much more. He was very explicitly and clearly hanging out with the guys, i.e., the other warders, for several hours, drinking during that time. Came back to her, and now she is emotional, which means that they have an emotional connection. So his emotions do impact her emotions, which means we have to assume that goes the other way as well, which again opens up even if she's unintentionally emotionally manipulating him, she's still emotionally manipulating him, which means how much agency do each of them have, frankly.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's reinforced again by the other warden that comes when one of them is killed and tries to break through the shield that's around the dragon, supposedly.
Yes, because you're right. When Kareen dies, Stepan, who is her warden, who's nowhere near the fight, immediately feels it and then goes to venture. Now, as a note, um, uh, we're about to talk about the Perrin and Gwen situation, but she does make a random comment where someone's asking her about Rand, and she says, "No, he's alive. I would know otherwise." So implying that Rand is going to become her warden or
Yeah,
warder.
he's got
So
the sword for it.
yeah, it's true. From his dad. Um, One other really small note that I don't know if you caught, but it was huge to me because I've lived in Ireland briefly. Um, one of the warders is a black man who's speaking in an Irish accent,
Hmm.
and that's really big. There are not very many black people in the Republic of Ireland, and few of them have the native Irish accent. And so I, again, suspect this was just the showrunner going, "Yeah, I don't use an Irish accent. That sounds good," not realizing how powerful of a statement that actually is to say this is a world where an Irish accent in a black man's mouth is a perfectly natural thing to have.
I didn't notice, but interesting. Because I'm thinking back now for when we went to Ireland and we're there for about 2 weeks. And I remember noting that I didn't see hardly any other black people at all.
Is a
And
very
we went
white
all
country.
around.
Mhm.
Maybe I saw three other black people.
And so that was a small thing, but I thought that was again like the moments where I don't know where it's clearly not crafted. Let me phrase that. The small moments where I can't determine whether it was intentional or not, and therefore I'm inclined to assume it's not. I see some interesting, powerful moments of inclusivity, but then the moments where it matters, it seems like they keep dropping the ball.
I would assume that was that actor's native accent, and
Maybe,
they just
yeah,
didn't
maybe
didn't comment on it. Like, eh.
that'd be awesome too. I would love if that were the case.
Now I want to look up who that actor was and see what they've been in before to find out.
Yeah. Anyway, so really briefly, because sadly it doesn't get much of this episode, Perrin and Egwene, uh, they had met up with some Tinkers, which are basically people who have completely renounced violence, and also they repair things for people as a way to make a living. So they repair things for food and money and whatnot,
So they're
and they're travelers.
Boggins.
Basically, yeah. Boglins mixed with Romani. So Um, and so they learned that the Tinkers follow the way of the leaf, and they're such pacifists they won't even pick up a weapon. They find themselves being drawn into the peaceful and contented life. So basically, Perrin and Egwene find themselves drawn into that peaceful and contented life. And Perrin learns that the way of the axe is not always the easy one because he obviously killed his wife in anger. So he's trying to maybe find a way to resolve that. But uh, he has a conversation with them and finds out that one of the women leaders of the community, her daughter was killed. And so she's like, absolutely, I want revenge. But what better way to get revenge than by eradicating violence? And I'll be honest, a lot of her argument is just nonsense. Um, but she does have a really good stunner line, which is that, "Has your life been better or worse since you picked up that axe?" And it's like, that's a good line, but her argument of because Perrin starts to deconstruct her argument. It's like, "You won't see any results of this." She's like, "Well, but, my children will." It's like, "No, no, but if they do 2 people, they'll 2 people." She's like, "It'll be thousands of years." It's like, "Yes, but then eventually it'll be gone." And then later, another conversation, they talk about how, they have to leave and find their way in the world in order to come back to see if they really want to embrace. You can't force people to embrace pacifism. And Egwene's talking to somebody else, and he's like, "Yeah, sometimes people actually take up arms." And so I was like, "Okay, so wait a minute. If one person converts 2 people into pacifism, eventually they'll succeed. But if a certain percentage of them then go back and pick up arms, they are not converting people, and also you've lost a person. So your math doesn't make sense.
At this point, with this show, all I saw was they had an angry black man being lectured by an older white woman
Yeah, I wasn't even gonna go into that. I figured you want to go into that.
to stop being whatever.
Stop being so
And
angry.
that didn't help. Like I was already done with the show, and watching this episode put the final nail in that coffin that I will never pick up this show or talk about it again. I will probably not even read the books because I am just so offended by this.
Mhm.
And
Go ahead.
the concept of pacifism, I think, is nice, but I guess coming from me, that's also not something I could prescribe to for a multitude of reasons. Being that pacifism is a good concept, it does not work in application in the real world. And eventually, people could say that you could convince and convert people. But by that point in time, so many other people have died that couldn't have protected themselves. Where is that balance?
Right. Here's my concern with the way of the leaf entirely. The way this presented is so rigid, is so implausible that either the narrative intention is to show that this way of pacifism somehow actually works, which makes no goddamn sense compared to everything else in the show, is that somehow the only way to survive the coming of the dragon is to not fight at all, which the show's objectively pointed out fighting people is the only way to get shit done. Or they're just a bunch of lunatics and therefore invalidating pacifism as an entire concept because
Hmm.
no other pacifists exist in this show. So either this is such a moon-eyed, idealistic version of pacifism that it's irreconcilable, or it's such a ham-fisted critique of pacifism that it feels offensive.
Ugh. I would like to think that it is not that. But given this show, I can't make that assertion.
So anyway, last thread. We have Rand, Matt, and Tom. They fled to Breen's Spring, but Rand and Tom aren't quite sure. Rand and Matt aren't quite sure they can trust Tom. They stop at Grinwell Farm and do some chores in exchange for a bed and meal for the night. Matt develops a mysterious, unnatural sickness that seems to manifest as darkness itself. Tom is suspicious and reveals to Rand that his nephew Owen could channel and was gentled by the Red Aja and killed himself afterwards. Rand continues to have strange, unnatural dreams involving a man with eyes and mouth of fire. Walking in the night, Rand and Tom discover Matt inside a farmhouse holding a long curved dagger with the ruby set in the hilt, which is the one he found in the dead city. And the Grinwell family is all dead, and a Fade is hiding in the darkness. Tom buys some time for Rand and Matt to escape.
Ugh. Ugh.
So,
Ugh.
the dagger is totally not possessed. It's totally fine.
It's more the fact that they convinced these poor farm people to let them stay there, the goodness of their heart, in exchange for doing a little bit of work, to then have potentially one of them kill them, maybe not kill them. I don't know.
Right. And we do find out that Owen was gentled by the Red Aja, and killed himself as a result. So it sets up again. This is where I kept going back to Dune analogies. Is the Aes Sedai are clearly not a monolith. Different Ajas apparently have different ideas on how they should be progressing as a group, and that has obviously brought them into conflict because we saw the conflict between the Green and Red Aja earlier. Um, so I like the fact that it sets up this complex society, but I use complex in air quotes because everything we've seen from Red Aja is that she's just evil. The very beginning of the episode, she's hunting a man down. As far as we know, that may be the very nephew that this guy's talking about, right?
Yeah.
Um, so she and none of her arguments in her argument about the Dragon Reborn was valid only in the regard the fact that like, hey, this guy's really powerful. We need to take his power from him. That part makes sense. But everything else is just purely because she wants to hurt him. She is a sadist. And so it's weird to see Egwene, who's a character I like, being sucked up into the Aes Sedai, 'cause it's like, why? Because 2 out of 3 people I've seen that are in control of this group are jerks, and the 3rd one died and came back.
Ugh. Yeah. Uh, I'm done with this show. Do you have any other thoughts about it?
Um, so I will say, I as much stick as I've given this show, uh, uh, I didn't hate watching it, but I also don't have strong any emotion about it. Like, part of the reason why I'm giving the show so much stick is because it's the only thing I have that really stuck in my head. The actual good parts I had to be kept you had to keep reminding me of. That said, the more I think about the things I don't like about the show, the more I think they could theoretically be resolved by the fact that they're teenagers. A lot of the stupid decisions these characters make more sense if they're younger.
Are you saying
So,
people in
unlike
their
you,
late 20s wouldn't make those same mistakes?
uh, I think teenagers are more prone to make stupid mistakes. Yes. Well, okay, people make stupid mistakes. I mean, let's just be honest.
Yeah,
Age is irrelevant. And yes, people in their 20s also. I made stupid mistakes when I was in the 20s. That I completely agree with too. But
I didn't. I was like Mary Poppins. I was practically perfect in every way.
I do not believe a word of that,
you're
except for maybe
probably
practical.
right.
You're probably right. Um, but I mean, so weirdly, I've actually more inclined to read at least the first book after watching this, because I do want to see, if nothing else, to see how much of this is textual versus how much of this was implied by the showrunners. Because in the margins of this, there's some really interesting stuff, like the fact that, I like the idea of the 3 oaths and the fact that you have to work around them. I do like the idea that there is a magic system that makes logical, consistent sense, because frankly, up till now, we have not seen that at all. Game of Thrones just didn't have really magic of any meaningful way.
The Witcher would be
Legend
the
of
closest one.
Seeker didn't. Legend of Seeker had a couple of rules that it followed, but that was pretty much it. And then even then,
Yeah.
like the guy that followed with them, he seemed to kind of invent magic stuff as he needed to, so it wasn't completely consistent.
And we throw in someone who's blatantly immune to magic at whim. So, yeah.
Right, right, yeah. So it's, um,
The Witcher was the
but
closest one, and that was only if we focus on Geralt as our person with magic. And he had like fundamental basic magic.
right, but even then, a lot of the stuff around his girlfriends, I forgot her name,
Yennefer.
um, Yennefer, that seemed pretty inconsistent
Yeah.
until she met Gerald, and then the rules kind of settled down a bit. But when she was in the academy, it kind of was just, well, I don't know, magic stuff. So I like the world of this. I do not like a lot of the characters in this, which is a problem. So that's why I may at some point read them, just because I have these next to them at the house, so I could probably just pull off the shelf and read it. But if it was a case of like I'd go out and check it out or buy it, no. And this show, I can see why people are still watching it, but that person will not be me.
Yeah. I've said it before. I see the quality of it, but it is not something made for me
Right.
and my general values of TV. And I wouldn't read the books. Maybe if you read them and said that you think they were great, I would probably read the ones that maybe Sanderson wrote.
Yeah, maybe just jump right to the end. Yeah. Honestly, there's so many other fantasy series out there. I don't know if I'll ever get around to them, frankly.
The thing is, much like you, my favorite part of this entire all right, you liked a lot more of the world. My favorite part of this entire thing is the magic system because
Yeah.
it seems to have definitive rules or strain and stresses to it. And in a couple episodes that we saw, those rules were adhered to. And
Right.
I'm a huge fan of like rules, and so you can figure out how things work.
And again, if you like that stuff, you can pick up Brandon Sanderson book and get the exact same benefit from a better writer.
Because this would be an incredibly easy game to make based on the rules that we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And as a game designer, I'm always thinking, how can I turn that into a game?
No, totally. I mean, I could see a whole system of like, here are the three oaths. If you do this, then you lose access to your magic or whatever. You know, kind of like a humanity system in Vampire. You know, it's like you get enough dings, eventually you start taking penalties. You're right; it's very gameable, which is I think the reason why I was appealed to the world building. Is like I can see the background notes almost on this. I can see the game master putting this stuff together. So there's a satisfaction in that regard. But man, I hate most of the characters.
Because I'm not even talking about it anymore now. But thinking about it from the gaming perspective of the series that we've watched, I'm trying to figure out which ones would be very easily gameable. And the one that I'm coming up with that would be the hardest would be Beastmaster and Conan.
Yep.
Because there are no defines on magic. I can do anything is like for Beastmaster.
So
Except animal talking power.
hilariously, I will actually do a bit of self promotion in the sense that um, Matthew Dawkins developed a game called They Came from Cyclops' Cave, along with a great team. Another developer worked on that, as well as a great team of writers. But the one thing I pitched for that game, for their Magic, because it's a fantasy game as opposed to the other They Came from games, all of They Came from games are you are playing characters who are in bad movies of that genre. So you're explicitly, meant to be playing schlocky movies. And so my pitch for the magic system was that the magic costs more depending on how hard the special effects are to do, not for how much power it is. So teleport is very simple because it's literally just take the camera one direction, point it back in the direction you're there. Whereas fireball is extremely hard to cast because it costs so much special effects budget.
Oh, I love that.
So
That's brilliant.
that is literally the only game who could do that kind of magic.
That's just brilliant.
Anyway, so 2021, Chris, what we talked about that. What's happening on the Netflix side of 2021?
We're going to cover Shadow and Bone, another series that I've not really watched. It'll be season 1, episode 1, season 1, episode 4, and season 1, episode 5. Super excited.
Yeah, I also have not seen it, so
I've,
I'm curious. A lot of risks
I've,
happening here. This chunk of the
I've heard
series.
it's based on a book series. I don't know for certain.
I mean, Shadow and Bone is probably not going to be a lighthearted series, given the name.
So, Eddie, towards the end of this episode, let's ask, how are you enjoying this fantasy run right now? What's our batting average?
So it's weird because I feel like from an analysis standpoint, we've been much more critical on this run than most of our other runs, frankly. I think from an analytical perspective, we have liked less shows, but I'm genuinely having a lot of fun doing it. And I'm not, I think part of it's because regardless of my feelings about fantasy as a genre, you can't be a gamer and not have a strong understanding of fantasy as a genre, right? I feel like it's been good to kind of stretch those muscles, and also the ones that I've liked, I've really liked. Like I genuinely enjoyed rewatching The Witcher. I actually really liked watching Legend of Seekers. So like and Conan was terrible, but we both loved it because it was terrible,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I still hold a small piece of my heart for the sorceress of Beastmaster. You know what I mean? Like, so it's been I've been enjoying the run, even though if you listen to our episodes, it doesn't sound like I have been. How
I
about you?
think part of the reason that we fall more on the analytical side for this is I think it's a genre we're not as steeped in as we are in other genres.
Yeah, maybe.
So that also means that part of the podcast itself is for us to have fun with these and not to be negative isn't the word I'm looking for, but to be like a downer. So by
Mhm,
relying more on the analytical part, we get to talk about the positive aspects of the show that have some positive parts, but at the same time, then we get to bring it back with our just viewer opinions of it. So it's been a better balance, I think, of those two than what some of the other things that we've covered are,
mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Although I do have to say, some of the show has corrupted me in a way for watching other media, because every once in a while I catch myself watching a show and going, "I'm really enjoying this," and then I start immediately turning around, like, "How would I talk about this on genre?" It's like, "Oh, this show is terrible. Oh, this is bad."
that that is actually one of the reasons why we have not covered the 1977 Hobbit, which is my every year Christmas movie, because I do not want my journalist hat on when I watch it.
Similarly, there is a new anime on Netflix, called Kinnikuman, which is just a bunch of bizarre superheroes wrestling, literally. They're all professional wrestlers. And I'm like, "I'm really enjoying this show," and there's it would take we would cover everything I wanna talk about the show in 2 minutes because it's just literally a bunch of wrestling matches of stupid characters doing stupid shit for episodes upon episode upon episode. It's bad from an analytical perspective, but I wouldn't have thought about that if I didn't have the show, so thank you for that. Thank you for ruining media for me, Chris.
You're welcome. I do what I can. Otherwise, if you want to end this, I am happy to. And if people want to watch The Wheel of Time, I hope that you enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah.
And don't come talk to me about it because I don't want to hear it.
Honestly, I will say, unlike Chris, if you've read the books and have an opinion on this, I would genuinely like to know, because I have heard so many people, even fans of Wheel of Time, have said, "Yeah, the back half of the books are a slog." It's like I don't want to read 6 books to get to the good part. It's like you're saying. I don't want to watch a whole season to get to the good part. Same thing. I don't want to read several books to get to the good parts. But so I would like to know how this measures up to real time because unlike other stuff where I've been like, "Yeah, I don't really know, but I don't really have much interest in it." I genuinely feel like there's a disconnect here. I want to know how big the disconnect is.
If we're talking 5 or 6 books that are 700 pages each, that is way too much to
Yeah,
read
yeah,
through to
yeah,
get
yeah.
the good stuff.
Agreed. I can read a whole bunch of other books.
I could be writing right then instead of reading.
That's true. So if people wanted to ask you about any show except for Wheel of Time, where would they find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm Darker Hue. I know you're surprised. If you want to buy some of my stuff so I can afford to buy more Wheel of Time books that'll sit on my shelf that I won't read, you can go to my website and purchase Haunted West, Harlem Unbound. It's darkhuestudios.com. Shocked. Shocked, I say, if you didn't know. What
Shocked,
about you?
shocked. Um, you can find me on Blue Sky as pugsteady.com. That's also my website where you can look at all the stuff that I have made. You can talk to me also on Darker Hue Discord. Yeah, like I said, I would love to hear more from people who are actual Wheel of Time fans. But otherwise, we will see you next week when we go into the world of Shadow and Bone.